I'm going to show you a super instructive game played by Fabiano Caruana. It's round 4 of the Superbet Classic in Bucharest, Romania. And Fabiano Caruana is playing with the white pieces against a very strong grandmaster, Bogdan Deac, the local hero, but also the bottom seed in this event. So Fabiano really wants to try to play for a win. And let's see how he's going to approach this game to put his 125 points lower rated opponent under pressure from the get-go. Before we're going to check out this game, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Thank you very much for all the support, guys. But you can even further support the channel, the growth of the channel, by making a small donation to my PayPal account. Thank you very much for doing so. And here we go, as Fabiano Caruana opens the game with 1d4. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop b4. Classical opening, the Nimzo-Indian defense, e3, castling kingside. And now, very interesting move, a3, attacking the bishop. Black is going to take on c3, trading off the bishop for the knight. And that is exactly what you want. Get an imbalance, not only in the pawn structure, because white has double pawns, but white also has the bishop pair. So the question is white's center going to be really strong, or is black able to prove that especially this bishop on c1 will remain a bad piece? We will see in a couple of moves from now. And well, Fabiano Caruana got probably also inspired by some games he played himself, even from the black side. He once lost a game against Grishuk in this line in only 26 moves. But now he's playing from the white side. So let's see how it works. Black played here the move c5. That's the classical way of trying to play against white's center, ensuring that these pawns, they cannot really move. So white goes bishop d3. The knight comes out to c6. And here, interesting idea. Is normally knight e2 is being played here with the idea to castle. But here, before doing that, Fabiano Caruana puts his rook on the b file. So the rook is on the half open file, adding a bit of pressure against the pawn on b7. Of course, it cannot be taken yet, but it also means that later on this bishop will have a harder time to get into the game. d6 is played. Now the knight is being developed to e2. And there are specific reasons why the knight goes to e2 and not to f3. We will see in a bit. And black played here the move e5. So this is all pretty standard, has been seen in many Nimzo-Indian games. This structure, you first give up your dark squared bishop as black, then put your pawns in the center on dark squares to be able to get your bishop into the game. White castled here. And now the rook went to e8. I mean, it should be said, though, that if you ever play a move like e4, the bishop can drop back to c2. And with plans like knight g3, followed by f3, you will put tremendous pressure against the pawn on e4. And all white's pieces will come alive with very nice attacking prospects. So therefore, black doesn't want to block the center here yet, because the pawn on e4 can always be challenged very soon. So instead, rook e8 played by Deac. And here, white goes for the move f3, controlling the e4 square one more time. Black plays the move b6. So the idea is that the bishop can now move somewhere. Also to a6 if you want, so that the pawn on c4 will be attacked one more time. But white played here another thematical move, e4, grabbing space in the center. And that is nice, so that the bishop can be released. But it's a pawn sacrifice, because the pawn on d4 is now 3 times attacked and only twice defended by the pawn on c3 and the knight on e2. So black takes on d4. C takes d4. And even now decided to take with the knight on d4. Knights are coming off the board. And now the bishop comes to g5. This is a very unpleasant pin, so that the knight cannot move, as the queen will be hanging. But there are also other ideas, including white's plan of building up an attack on the king side with a move like f4, which can be played very soon. so that the path for the queen towards the king side will be opened. Also, the rook is ready to join the action very, very soon. And black played here this move, rook e5, attacking the bishop. And I think Bogdan Deac had a very interesting idea in mind, but Caruana didn't fall for it. I mean, the most tempting move here for white is to play f4 to hit the rook and defend the bishop. In that case, there is rook takes g5, a positional exchange sacrifice, because after taking on g5, black is an exchange down, but gets fantastic grip on the dark squares. The pawn on g5 will be lost very soon. Their idea is to come in with a knight to e3 or even put it on e5. And this bishop on d3 doesn't look great at all. So it's good that Fabiano didn't fall for it. He just dropped back with the bishop to h4, maintaining pressure on the knight. The queen goes to e7. And here the bishop goes back to e2 to open up the path for the queen to regain the pawn on d4. And this looks like a very comfortable situation for white. Well, black went for a rook a5, hitting the pawn on a3. And before taking the pawn on d4, it makes sense to defend it one more time with rook b3. And well, there are still some issues here. You cannot really stick to the pawn on d4. Let's say if you play queen e5, getting out of the pin and defending the pawn, there is bishop f2. And the pawn on d4 cannot be protected by any other black piece. So that looks like a very instructive maneuver. This bishop from c1 is getting back all the way to f2 to wrap up the pawn on d4. Well, instead of queen e5, black instead went here for the move bishop a6. Now you can just recapture with the queen right away. And well, Deac's plan was now to play this move queen e5, hoping that in case white is gonna take, you can always take back with the pawn. And then black has managed to solve that problem of his backward pawn on the half open file. But rather than take trading of queens here, white further strengthens his position with the move rook d1, so that you're attacking the pawn on d6. Queen takes d4, rook takes d4, and pawn on d6 is under threat. Now, the only good news for black, if you can call it good news actually, there is the possibility to move the knight away from f6. Knight is no longer pinned. It can go back to e8 to defend the pawn on d6. But as you can see, the knight is extremely passive here, can barely move, always has the defensive duty here to keep the pawn defended. And how should white proceed here? Because it's not so easy to do something with that pawn on d6. Well, Fabi has a very instructive maneuver. He sees that the bishop on h4 has done its job. So it comes back to e1 to hit the rook. So forcing the rook to go back. Rook c5 played. And now the bishop comes to b4. I like this maneuver very much because once again you're making a tempo move. You're hitting the rook. The rook goes back to c6 to defend the pawn on d6 as well. But you see now that also the rook on b3 no longer needs to keep the pawn on a3 defended. Pawn on a3 is not even under attack anymore. So nice little improvement by white. His pieces are nicely coordinated. He has the bishop pair. Of course, you can say that the pawn on c4 is also a weakness. But for now, white is just going to increase its advantage by grabbing space on the king side. f4 is a very good move. Rook ac8 played. So here you see the both rooks and the bishop are hitting the pawn on c4, but white can defend it. So interestingly, pawn on c4 is also a weakness, as I said, but it's very well defended, and black is unable to increase the pressure on that point. So what should be done here? Hard to say. I think black is very passive, while white has still plenty of useful moves to consider here. Black went for waiting move with rook from c8 to c7, and now the king comes. The king is of course also a very important piece, especially once the queens are coming off the board. The king can definitely help white to support the center. Black played h5, preventing white from further expanding with the G and H pawn, for instance, and hoping that white is going to take on h5. There's a bishop takes c4 in that case, and that would be quite a good trade for black. But instead, white goes h3. White is not in a rush. Black plays g6. And now the pawn goes to a4. Also a good move, controlling the b5 square, making it harder for black to create any sort of counterplay. Maybe at some point white can consider a move like a5. But also, if you need, you can drop back with your bishop. So the bishop can never really get trapped there somehow. Rook c8. Here you see that Deac is struggling to come up with a good plan. I mean, he has everything defended, but white has a space advantage, and therefore black is suffering. And also, typically for Deac, he is always getting in time trouble. I'm not sure about his exact situation on the clock at this point, but I have seen him playing before in the past, and I know that he has very intense time trouble games. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case here as well. King e3 played by Fabiano. So the king comes to the center, the bishop comes back to b7. And now white continues with the announced plan. He played here the move f5. And I think that is a good move. You have all sorts of ideas to bring up the g-pawn as well, put a king on f4, and you can feel the pressure. You see that white's pieces are coming to better squares every move. Now, I think very big technical mistake made by Deac as he captured the pawn on f5. I really dislike this move. White, of course, recaptures because the pawn on h5 is now also an isolated pawn. There are so many weaknesses in black's position. Knight went to f6, trying to keep everything protected, setting up a little trap, guys. The pawn on d6 is now twice attacked, but you cannot really take it. If you take with a rook, for instance, you can trade off one pair of rooks. Black is giving a check, and the king got to keep the bishop defended. But if you go, for instance, to d3, there is knight to e4 with a huge knight fork. So that is the sort of idea black was looking for. That's why Deac actually captured on f5 to open up the e-file for the rook. But understanding what black's idea is, white just gets out of that file by playing the move king f4. King is absolutely safe here, supporting the pawn. And black, hoping for counterplay, went here for the move d5, getting rid of that pawn weakness, because probably if you don't play that move, that pawn on d6 can be taken at some point. So d5 played, but here another very nice move, because you see that the center gets more and more opened, and that means that the bishops of white, they are coming alive. Bishop e7 played, and here you see that the pawn on c4, if it's gonna be taken, there is bishop f3, and the rook cannot stay on the 6th rank to keep the knight defended. If rook goes away, white is going to take the knight on f6. So all of a sudden, white's bishops are taking over control in the center. Pawn takes c4 is not a good move, but there are not that many good options here either. Instead, rook e8 was played, and after this move, you got to be a little bit careful, because of course these two bishops are both hanging, and you don't want to just trade off the bishop for the knight here. But Fabiano Caruana played a very good move, rook e3, neutralizing the pressure down the e-file, and there is absolutely nothing black can do. Bishop is defended, you're threatening to take on d5, winning a pawn. And if you take, for instance, yourself on c4, and this was probably the idea Deac had in mind at this point, there is bishop takes f6, and white is winning material, because if you do take back with the rook, white can take the rook on e8. And instead, if, as black, you take first the rook on e3, you don't have to take back on e3, but you can give a very important check on d8, forcing the king to go to h7, and then it's rook h8 with checkmate, thanks to the bishop and rook, and of course also the pawn on f5 is helping in the mating procedure. So after the move rook e3, black actually resigned. May seem a bit premature, but the position is just collapsing here. because of that threat of pawn takes d5. So very nice and important victory for Fabiano Caruana, who is now with 3 out of 4 in the sole lead. Of course, we are just halfway the tournament, 5 more rounds to be played. Anything can still happen, but Fabiano is in very good shape. Having managed to win 2 games and 2 draws, he is also making quite a nice little jump on the rating list again, as he comes back to the 2800 club. 2802 is his current live rating, leapfrogging Hikaru Nakamura, so he's now the new world's number 2. But we know that in every game of chess, the rankings can change. But of course, it must give Fabiano Caruana a huge boost for the remainder of this event. Let me know what you think of this game. Are there any other interesting games from this event which you would like to see covered? I will try to do my best to keep you updated on the most interesting moments from this Superbet Classic in Bucharest. Thanks for watching. See you soon again. Bye bye.